welcome to this webinar on relocation to Gibraltar. Across the course of the next 60 minutes, we're going to be giving you all the facts and details that you would need if you're a high net worth client considering a move to the jurisdiction. We're going to cover visa and residency and tax options, the tax landscape. We're going to look at the real estate market. We're going to look at wealth planning and financial management. So lots to discuss over the course of the next hour. Delighted to have our audience with us today on Zoom. Do put a question in the chat or the Q&A. I'll be looking for your questions and comments and seek to bring those questions to our two experts across the course of the hour. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome both Stuart Dalmedo from ISOLAS and Matt Penfold from Fiduciary Wealth Management. Welcome, gents. So I think, Stuart, you're on mute, but there we go. So first of all, it'd be great to have a little introduction. It'd be great to hear, Stuart, how you help clients move to Gibraltar and a little bit more about your background.
Certainly, thank you for having me. My name is Stuart. I'm a partner at ISOLAS LLP, which is Gibraltar's longest established law firm. I'm one of the partners within the private client team, specializing in taxation, and we assist high net worth individuals and businesses with relocating to Gibraltar, but with a particular focus from the UK. So we assist with setting up businesses, applying for specialist tax statuses, residency, and assisting individuals and their families alike.
Fantastic. And Matt, it'd be great to get a bit of your background and how you help clients on the move.
Of course, David. Well, it's good to be here today. Thanks for having me. Matt Penfold, Director and Financial Planner here at Fiduciary Wealth Management. We are a regulated financial advisory and wealth management firm here in Gibraltar, also regulated in the UK. And yeah, we specialise in helping Brits relocate to Gibraltar. That's helping them with their residency, their financial planning, everything from their investments, savings and pensions, and help their journey to a new life in Gibraltar.
Fantastic. We're going to get into some detail in a moment with Stuart. But first of all, I wanted to come to you both for just your thoughts. This is a webinar as part of a global mobility series. Mobility of high net worth clients is a very key topic. What's your sense of where demand is for Gibraltar right now? Are you noticing an uptick in inquiries, more people looking at options? I mean, Stuart, do you have a sense of where we are on the trends in the market?
I think the trends of Gibraltar is very positive. The interest is through the roof, to be honest with you, and that was evidence last year that since October, the government had to suspend a lot of sort of the main residency options because of the increased interest in residency in Gibraltar, in particular with the announcement last year of the Gibraltar EU agreement, and that Gibraltar will have a form of Schengen. So as soon as that was introduced, apart from some of the other benefits that I'm sure we'll discuss during the webinar, that just increased, but the government had to decide that they had to control it. So that move in itself, I think, demonstrates that there is a very big interest in Gibraltar.
Matt, are you seeing similar trends, uptick in interest, people looking at options?
Absolutely. I mean, I'd echo a lot what Stuart has just said. I think from our point of view, you know, we've seen a kind of uptick over the years. A lot of things have driven people towards Gibraltar. I think Brexit was a factor. Less people could go to the EU. COVID was a huge factor. People found that they could work remotely and you know, do you want to work remotely from your flat in the UK or from your, you know, near the beach in Gibraltar? And the treaty that Stuart mentioned, that's created even more demand. And so from a business point of view, it's great. I think the other thing that's helped us as well is what's going on in the UK. I think we've seen a lot of people, you know, you deal with a lot of global mobility, a lot of people exiting the UK, and Gibraltar is one of those options. And I remember there was a budget in 24, the autumn budget, the first Labour budget. And I say this kind of tongue in cheek, but it was almost a marketing exercise for us, because after that, well, even leading up to that, the amount of inquiries we fielded were huge, and it's kind of continued since then.
And just on the nationalities of relocators, I mean, the UK is the major market, but what other nationalities do you see? I mean, Stuart, do you see a mixture of nationalities in people looking up the relocation options?
Do we see a mixture? Yes, but I would say certainly the majority does come from the UK. So my experience, we're probably seeing around 80+% coming from the UK. and then the rest from different jurisdictions. I wouldn't pinpoint, but absolutely the UK is the majority of the market.
Okay, makes sense. So Stuart, let's come into some of the details then, looking at some of the fundamentals. Someone sat in the UK today, a high net worth client. What are their main residency pathways, and who are they suited for? Perhaps you can sketch the landscape.
So like I mentioned briefly before, Gibraltar has generally suspended the traditional or general residency applications, but this is subject to certain caveats. Now, some of those caveats are specifically for high net worth individuals and for certain employees who relocate and provide certain economic benefits. So as it stands today, high net worth individuals can relocate to Gibraltar and take up residency if they take up one of these specialist tax statuses under either the Category 2 status or the HEPSS status, which I'm sure we'll come on to.
And so yeah, Category 2. I mean that's something that anyone reading around the subject will have seen. Perhaps you could explain what that means and what that offers.
Absolutely. So Category 2 status is a status for high net worth individuals. This applies to any individual who has net assets in excess of £2 million. In order to get that status, which is a tax status, one must again have the £2 million. You must have a property in Gibraltar, which is either purchased or rented, and the property has to meet a particular standard. You have to have private medical insurance that covers Gibraltar and other areas because individuals wouldn't be entitled to the public health care. And with Category 2, its individuals are subject to a minimum tax of £37,000 per annum and subject to a maximum of current rates of 42,360. So this would include your worldwide income. So regardless of how much income you would earn, this could be included within the cap of the 40-odd thousand, subject to 2 income streams. So this wouldn't include Gibraltar rental income or income from a Gibraltar business or trade. But apart from that, that worldwide income could be included within the cap 2. So if an individual has sufficient income streams, then certainly it's a very tax advantageous status for that individual.
Okay, thank you. And the high executive possessing specialist skills, HEPSS. Tell us about that. It's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it?
It really is, and you got it first time. So, so HEPSS is a specialist employment status. It's available for individuals who relocate to Gibraltar to take up employment, and for individuals who have specialist skills that are not readily available in Gibraltar and who will bring those skills for the betterment of the Gibraltar economy. Usually, typical HEPSS individuals come in and work for some of the financial services companies, insurance, gaming companies. And with that, the requirements are, because you're an employee, you do pay social insurance and you are entitled to the health. There are similar restrictions with the property, that it has to be a HEPSS approved property suitable for the individual and the family. But the benefits of HEPSS is that an individual is only taxed on the basis of having income of £160,000 per annum. So once they exceed that amount, they would only pay tax on an income based on 160,000, regardless of what they earn from that employment. So if you have high executives who are earning a considerable amount of sums, again, it brings the effective rate considerably down.
Okay, we heard some of the headline tax rates there on with the different programs, but perhaps you could just contrast versus like the UK system or people who understand the UK tax environment. What's the contrast into Gibraltar, and what planning flows from that?
So I think if we split this into two, firstly is the corporate. So from a corporate perspective, corporate tax is 15%. But the key differential here between the UK is, and unlike the UK, which my understanding is based on incorporation or residence, Gibraltar has a territorial basis of taxation, meaning that only income which accrues and derives from Gibraltar is taxable. So that in itself could be advantageous, and a lot of planning around that. When it comes to the personal, apart from the 2 specialist tax statuses and the income bands that I've set for, let's call them normal or standard taxpayers, the effective rate is around 25 or 26%, which again is significantly lower than the UK. I believe the top range bracket can go up to 45%. And apart from that, other benefits are that Gibraltar doesn't have any capital gains tax. Obviously, very, very attractive for UK businessmen looking to come to Gibraltar. ensuring that they cut their UK ties, selling their shares in Gibraltar and utilizing the non-capital gains. Gibraltar doesn't have any VAT. It doesn't have any wealth tax. And I think one of the key ones as well is that Gibraltar does not have any inheritance tax.
And on the high value properties, like for the Cat 2, is there any stamp duty or any transactional taxes around the property, or?
Yes, so there would be stamp duty on the
Yeah.
purchase of property. Stamp duty is payable in respect of Gibraltar real estate. Depending if you're a first or a second time buyer, the rates, there are certain exemptions, and depends on the value of the properties as well, the rates apply. There are some planning that can be had in respect of stamp duty, in respect of individuals and then corporates, but generally the rates range between 0 up to certain amounts, and then around 5%, roughly, between certain brackets.
And I imagine a lot of your time is also interlinking with advisors onshore, say in the UK or elsewhere, to get the planning right, because the other side is also complicated, isn't it? In a sense of your side is fairly straightforward, if I may, but the traps might exist from people retaining ties or spending too much time, for example, in the UK. Do you spend a lot of time liaising with counsel overseas to make sure the planning's right?
100%. It's quite common actually for clients to approach us first and to seek the Gibraltar advice first. And when our question is, oh, we're still UK resident, we have to switch. And look, you need the UK advice first, because as you are currently resident in the UK, we can certainly do what we need to do in Gibraltar. But if it doesn't work from your UK perspective, so certainly for high net worth individuals, we absolutely deal with a lot of them will have their own UK advisors. Otherwise, we have a network of various firms in the UK, but when it comes for relocating high net worth individuals and families, then absolutely tax planning on both fronts is essential, not only on the individuals, but on the businesses, in the case that they're shareholders and obviously the company directors of those businesses.
And just looking at the double taxation agreement between the UK and Gibraltar, what are the key points to take away from that? How does it have an impact?
So the DTA with the UK came into effect in 2020. It's based on the OECD model, and the purpose of the treaty, like many other treaties, is to resolve things such as double taxation, issues surrounding dual residence. So the key is now that there are established rules in the case of, for example, dual residence, where the residence rules in Gibraltar and the UK, and if the two jurisdictions treat an individual as resident depending on their rules, because they are different, then the treaty establishes the rules and processes that will sort of put residency to one individual. So it does provide that clarity for the UK and sort of cross-border Gibraltar connections.
And where do what's the most common mistakes that arise? I mean, obviously every client's different and situations are different, but are there any running themes that people consistently are surprised by or get wrong?
I think the first one is that a UK national comes to Gibraltar and just assumes that they can reside indefinitely in Gibraltar. In fact, we've had quite a few clients who come over, don't seek the advice, and they rent a property for 12 months. And in some cases, they purchase a property. And after doing that, they come and say, oh, I need to apply for residency. And in many cases, especially now at this moment in time, there are little, if not no residency routes for those individuals. So certainly my advice would be get the advice first to ensure that you have the right to reside and obtain residency before making the commitment to come over.
And Matt, I mean, just to bring you in, I mean, what do you see as common mistakes, errors, misunderstandings in the clients that you've helped? Do you see any trends in what people get wrong or underestimate?
Yeah, there were a few common ones. I think the one that Stuart raised is one that we've seen at all as well. And it's interesting, after they introduced the treaty, people started concerned that they would get caught out living here without residency. And I even received a couple of anonymous calls, I won't tell you my name, but what can we do? And our advice was very similar. There are no routes to residency for certain people. I think probably the biggest one I have is that maybe people who want to establish their tax residency in Gibraltar, but don't consider where they want to spend the time. Maybe they want to spend too much time still in the UK, and they think that they can spend up to 183 days. That's not the case. They need to, abide by the UK statutory test. Or on the other side, people who maybe want to establish their tax residency in Gibraltar and spend a lot of time in Spain as well. A big mistake, because you can kind of trigger tax residency in Spain, which can be quite brutal.
So I guess the balance of spending time becomes the problem, doesn't it? And the challenge, like you say, between time in Spain, Gibraltar, UK, getting that wrong is very easy, isn't it? Unless people are on top of their admin and have the setup.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Stuart, just to come back to you, so on Schengen is it's a huge topic. There's been some changes recently. Give us the latest from that and what you think that the changes mean for high net worth clients thinking about Gibraltar at the moment.
Well, in fact, today in the news, they announced that they've started the Schengen Shack. What that means, I mean, just to take a step back, last year they announced that the political agreement had been agreed. I think the point to make is that Gibraltar will not be part of the full Schengen zone. So the intention was never for Gibraltar to be a Schengen country, but the intention is to effectively have removed the border between Spain and to have the checks between the entry points. So it will have a quasi very, very unique Schengen style arrangement, but with that is very attractive. So the fact that an individual becomes a resident in Gibraltar and will effectively have free access to Spain into a Schengen zone, that is the attraction, but that is still not implemented. Optimistically, they're looking already making changes before April in respect of the frontier for certain things. But if this does happen and there is sort of that removal of the border and the free entry into Spain, I think that is certainly the attraction for high net worth individuals.
So it'll take down the frictions, won't it, that sort of exist?
I mean, there are frictions, although certainly right now you can cross the border. There's a land border and you go through the certain checks, but absolutely it will remove those additional hurdles and there'll be much more of a free movement in and out of Gibraltar and Spain.
And on the residency permit and tax residence, I mean, we touched on this slightly, but just to be explicit on it, what's the difference between getting the residency permit and having a tax residency status? So it's clear for people.
I think this is a misconception. So as soon as people apply for residency, and like I said, Cat 2 is a tax status, and after your status, you then apply for your residency. And a lot of people, when they get their residency, assume that that's a tax residency, that they go to banks. But residency from an immigration and residency from a tax perspective are two different things. You can have your permit of residency from immigration that allows you to reside in Gibraltar, but to be considered a tax resident in Gibraltar, you have to meet one of two tests. Number one is that you are present in Gibraltar for 183 days in a tax year, and the Gibraltar tax year runs from the 1st of July to the 30th of June. And the second test is that you have been present 300 days over the last consecutive 3 years, so around an average of 3 years. So that is the definition of tax residency. And if you ever need to go to a bank or you need to provide any checks or verifications on your tax residency, that is the sole test used to ascertain your tax residency in Gibraltar.
Thank you. And if the UK tax year is peculiar on the April to April, and moving partway through the year can have unintended consequences, particularly say if there's some critical planning going on with a dividend payment or some material element of tax planning, what's your advice around those looking at a move vis-a-vis the UK tax year?
I think timing is key. You've hit the nail on the head. I mentioned that the Gibraltar tax year is July to June. The UK tax year is obviously 5th of April. Then other jurisdictions, Spain, have the calendar year, which doesn't help. But I think here timing and key indicators are key. Like you've said, if bonus payments are going to be made or dividends payments are going to be made, then it's imperative that you get that advice in the UK. Simply leaving the UK and coming to Gibraltar does not sever your ties. I know the UK has different rules, and if you come in between the tax year, you could be taxed in the full year, or if you meet certain requirements, it could be subject to a split tax year treatment in the UK. Again, imperative that the advice is sought in the UK to ensure that whatever is done in Gibraltar actually works from a sort of global, holistic perspective.
Thank you. And Matt, just shifting gears onto the financial planning side, when someone's coming to Gibraltar, perhaps with some of the tax planning in mind, what's your first piece of advice? How do you start to work with someone when you get that inquiry about someone considering a move?
I think because you mentioned tax there, David, I think the one thing that's important is people can't move just purely for tax reasons. When we speak to people here, I think there's really two broad categories. That there's the financial reasons and the lifestyle reasons. And I think you really need to kind of tick those two boxes. So often I've spoke to people and they're so attracted by the tax reasons, and kind of goes back to what I said before. They maybe don't want to cut those ties in the UK. They want to spend too much time in the UK, but you have to almost be kind of all in. It's got to kind of tick both those boxes. I've seen it before. People come for the tax reasons, even if they make that move and it doesn't quite work out for them because it has to be the lifestyle reason.
Mm.
I think the other thing that's very important at the start, and I think it's going to be a bit of a kind of common theme in this webinar, is the UK side.
Mm.
You know, we can't forget the UK, and really when we're talking from a tax point of view, Gibraltar's not the issue. Gibraltar's the solution. The UK is the issue because you've got higher taxation. So really our advice is to plan in advance. We, urge people to contact us well in advance because there's this incredible opportunity to make this life in Gibraltar from a tax point of view, but you need to do it properly. It's not a case of just arriving here and thinking, great, I'm paying a lot less tax now. You need to structure that and plan it properly.
And I mean, getting the property right is important in any kind of relocation. People are, like you say, have got to picture the lifestyle and all of that. So perhaps you could describe a little bit about the property market and particularly like whether you see relocators buying straight away, renting. What's the sort of dynamics in a relocation case?
Yeah, the property is very important. And I think in my engagements, early engagements with people, I think the property is the one area that tends to make people take a kind of step back because the prices are higher, you get less for your money here. That's kind of property is supply and demand. Gibraltar is a small jurisdiction and there's a lot of people who want to move here. Therefore, you're paying a lot more than you would in most areas of the UK. I think with the prices as well, there was a big shift in Gibraltar during the COVID period. I think again that happened a lot of places. There was a big rise in house prices. But again, Gibraltar being a small jurisdiction, well, I say hit it for those owning property was great news. You saw some prices go up kind of 50%, even more. That came down a little bit since then. And from what I've seen at the moment, prices have kind of flattened out a bit. It really depends, where in Gibraltar you're looking at, what sort of facilities you want and that sort of thing. And of course, as you say, are you looking to buy? Are you looking to rent? Maybe one before the other. It really depends.
And it's apartment living, is it? I mean, what are the different styles of property that people might buy, or where, if there are substantially larger properties, where where does that kick in, or sketch us out
Yeah,
the style of property?
yeah, the majority is apartment living.
Yeah.
I think there are some houses more towards the back end. I don't know why I'm pointing there, like people can see, but it's in that direction from the office. But it's majority apartment living, and it varies. You've got different areas as well, which I think would suit different people. You've got, say, the Ocean Village, Marina Bay. That tends to be where the restaurants are. A lot of offices are down there. Um, you'd probably get more drawn to that area for the younger people. Whereas you've got areas like Queensway Quay. That's again a marina area, but it's a lot more quieter, a bit more residential, maybe a bit more peaceful, beautiful out there. People maybe want to be in the centre. People want to be further out, nearer the schools, nearer the hospital. Again, what I see with Gibraltar is, again, I referenced that it's a small area or a small jurisdiction, but you've got all these different areas. There is really something for everyone. And I think you have to kind of experience that yourself. We talked earlier about kind of mistakes. And the one thing we see is I have conversations with people, and one of my first questions is, oh, what do you know about Gibraltar? When was the last time you've been to Gibraltar? And they say, oh, I've never been. I saw it on the TV the other day. And I think you need to kind of experience that for yourself, especially if you include, considering such a huge lifestyle change.
And what's the integration like? I mean, what do you see amongst those who do relocate? There's a vibrant social scene. People, describe how you see relocators who make a success of it. What kind of approach do they take to the making friends and socializing in the jurisdiction?
For me, I think that's one of the real plus points for Gibraltar that maybe doesn't it gets overlooked a little bit. I think there's a lot of integration. I think you've got a lot of people coming here from different areas, different, of course, there's more Brits that come here, but You've got people of all kind of nationalities, and I think generally people mix very, very well here. Of course, people, if you grew up in Gibraltar, you have your friends through school and stuff like that. But I think there's a real integration. Gibraltar people are incredibly friendly, and they do want to welcome people. And I think it's like any country. If you go to the country and you want to be involved in society, people will welcome you. You just need to embrace it. I think it helps that we have a kind of outdoor lifestyle here more than the UK, so people just kind of naturally mix a little bit more anyway. I think that really helps.
And just on the financial side, I mean, what kind of like net worth does it start to make sense from? I mean, if you look at, say, the purchase of the property, the living costs, I mean, what kind of what's the sort of run rate that people, what's the asset base people need for it to be, to start to make sense, if you like?
No, I mean it's a good question and it can vary. Again, if the property is a big one. The property is a big one that, to buy or to rent, rental prices can be quite high. I think historically, a lot of younger people who came here and were at the start of their career, they may live across the border in Spain where it's a lot cheaper to rent and then work in Gibraltar. Post-Brexit, for Brits at least, that's not really an option. When we come to people who are more kind of established, I think Gibraltar maybe, and there are exceptions to that, but I think Gibraltar really attracts people in the maybe kind of 1 to 10 million bracket.
Yeah.
There are, ultra high net worths here, especially. But I would say maybe they're maybe more attracted to somewhere more lavish like Monaco. We see Dubai very popular at the moment. But from my experience, that kind of 1 to 10 million is a bit of a sweet spot for Gibraltar.
No, very interesting. And do people borrow to buy the property, or they buy for cash? Is part of the with the Cat 2, are there local mortgages, or how do people make the property purchase out of their asset base?
Yeah, no, I mean, we have the banks here and they offer
Yeah.
mortgages. I think the mortgage rates here, you'd find that they tend to be slightly higher than the UK. They're based on UK base rates, UK bank rates, the UK, but I think there's a slight premium just because there's a few less options. There's a huge mortgage market in the UK and less so in Gibraltar. And I think UK banks won't lend to a Gibraltar property.
Mm.
A lot of people buy cash when
Mm.
they come, especially your retirees. A lot of people are selling their UK property and they use it to fund their Gibraltarian property. Some people may have UK property and they may take out a mortgage on that to fund the Gibraltar property. That's not uncommon at all as well.
Okay. Thanks for that. Makes sense. Stuart, from the property transaction side, what should people be aware of, know of the conveyancing process, or getting the property bought?
I think from the process itself, I mean, there are different properties depending on your requirements. There might be certain restrictions. So, like I said, if you're applying for Category 2 or HEPSS, it has to be a specific property of proof of that purpose, but you can get the clearance from the finance center in advance without having to sort of commit to the property. Apart from that, there are certain properties which are at the lower end of the market and which were done on a sort of governmental support system. Those are limited to residents who have been resident for a 3-year period. But apart from that, most of the properties are available to any individual. And another key consideration is whether the property should be purchased in an individual's name, or whether the property should be purchased within a company or another structure. And again, no right or wrong, and that would really depend on the circumstances of the individual, whether they're looking to have the property for investment, residential, do they have touch points in different jurisdictions? But
So owning through a structure is more about the administration, privacy, other things. It's not going to be about tax, because the tax position's quite straightforward, isn't it?
it could be about tax. I mean, if you
Okay.
buy a property to invest and you rent out that property, that's Gibraltar source income that's taxable. If you receive it in an individual name, that's taxed at 25, 26%. If you receive it in a Gibraltar company, the company is only taxed at 15%. But then if you need to take out funds from that company to shareholders, it gives you a bit more structuring options. So tax actually could be one of the considerations for holding companies.
And are there any restrictions around modifying the property? Do people run into issues like on planning and stuff like that? Or if they're buying an apartment, it's pretty much live in as it is, and or do you encounter clients who want to redevelop and then have to know the planning setup in Gibraltar? What does that throw up?
Certainly, I mean, as Matt said, most of them are apartment living, so you can't just sort of start constructing, and there'd be a lot of restrictions within those apartments. You'd have sort of the main the main landlord and the leases. So when it comes to sort of apartments, there are significant restrictions that prevents people. Of course, you can do certain things to the inside of your property, unless you're talking about things such as supporting walls and any constructual works to an apartment. You do need to run it plus sort of the planning department, certainly, and get checks, because if you don't do that, then you will have issues when it comes to selling the property and trying to obtain the certificate of fitness required as part of the property. Certainly, what I would recommend as a lawyer, of course, is for any property purchase to be done via law firm, because that lawyer will be able to guide the individual to cross all the T's and undertake all the necessary checks that is required to ensure that the property is purchased in a legal manner.
Thank you. And Matt, just coming to the wealth and financial planning, just looking at a profile of a Brit client who's retiring, selling up in the UK, has built a pension, built ISAs, got various UK sort of centric savings wrappers, and then is transitioning to come and reside in Gibraltar. What's your financial planning process to look at the personal balance sheet, work out what the strategy should be going forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, because of course there's not a kind of one size fits all process. So it depends. Firstly, I guess we need to kind of analyze their current situation, where their assets are held, and it's important for us to understand, what their goals are. What are they trying to achieve? And then we can plan to get them to that destination. Are they concerned, if we're talking about retirees here, are they concerned about inheritance tax? And there's a kind of planning process that involves in that. Are they still trying to kind of accumulate their wealth and plan towards that as well? I think from our point of view, we tend to engage with people when they're considering the residency first. So it's a nice first step, and the conversation kind of evolves from there, really. And then you get a real big picture of their financial situation. And of course, a lot of people say, I just want to pay as little tax as I can legally. And that can be part of the process, but it's only part of the process. And it's, where do we want to be, and how do we get there?
And just looking at a couple of the specific sort of wrappers, so obviously like a pension is a core bit of planning in the UK, substantial value often accrued in a pension. People reading around this subject might have seen pension transfers, QROPs, things like that. Give us the latest for what's the headlines from that field, and the opportunity around someone who moves in has a UK pension. What should they be thinking about in respect of that asset?
Yeah, I think a Gibraltar QOPS is a huge opportunity for Brits moving here. So a QOPS, for those who don't know, that's a qualifying recognised overseas pension scheme. So in the past, Brits who moved abroad, they could take their pension with them and move it to a QOPS, and there were no restrictions to that. And then in 2017, the UK brought in the overseas tax charge, so 25%, unless you and your pension are in the same jurisdiction, I think they labelled it. So at that point, you could be, say, living in a European country, and your QOPS is in another country. So when Gibraltar was still in the EU, Gibraltar QOPS, and you live in Spain or Portugal, wherever you want to be. In the 2024 budget, they then excluded that. So you can only transfer your pension to a QOPS if you live in the same country where the QOPS is established. And Gibraltar is one of the few jurisdictions where there are QOPS schemes. I think the only other one in Europe is Malta. So it's quite a unique opportunity that's really only for people moving to Gibraltar. Now, one of the huge benefits of that is if you have a QOPS in Gibraltar and you're drawing income from it, you pay income at a flat rate of 2.5%. 2.5%, that's it. And that's after you can still take your tax-free lump sum, the 25%. In fact, if you've been here longer than 5 years, you can potentially take 30%. But when you draw income, you pay 2.5%. Now, there are caveats with that. It won't be a flexi scheme like you have in the UK. So anyone who thinks I'm going to come here, I'm going to close a whole pension down, take 2.5. So the income is subject to GAD rates that they calculate based on yields, your age, the size of the pot, how much you can take. But it's quite a generous allowance. There's
So for
also
those
caveats that,
genuinely,
yeah,
for
if
those
you return to the
genuinely,
UK, but it's, I mean, look, if you're taking pension income in the UK, you're lucky if you're paying 20% these days. You know, it's going to be 40, 45%. When I tell people they can pay 2.5%, yeah, it's sold.
okay, that is a very interesting, interesting point. And for those who are genuinely going to be resident and plan to use it as intended to draw down, support the retirement, that sounds very, very attractive. What about things like if they have, for example, an offshore insurance bond or something like that? Do you, I suppose it's all case by case, but in general, do people, if they don't need the liquidity from the policy, do they perhaps carry on managing, having their assets managed within that kind of wrapper, or what are there any generalities there in terms of other wrappers outside the pension world?
I mean, they could do, David, and just to pick up on a point you said then about the Q-ops, and it's very important. Yeah, they've got to be genuinely wanting to live in Gibraltar. You know, some people, if they think, oh, I like the idea with this Q-ops, but they're not going to move, that's not going to work. When it comes to, I guess, with Gibraltar, because the taxation is so generous, the use of tax wrappers is not always, very rarely necessary, like
Mm,
offshore bonds.
mm,
So if you come to Gibraltar, you're paying maybe, you know, you have restrictions from the bond, you're paying higher fees,
mm,
maybe the investment selections aren't as broad.
mm.
Whereas, as Stuart said earlier, there's no capital gains tax in Gibraltar. That's generally what the bond will protect you from. Now, there are cases where the bond may work for you. Um, we've also got to consider in the planning that, and I should have mentioned this earlier, when we're looking at people's situation, are they moving to Gibraltar permanently, or are they moving to Gibraltar, but maybe they see themselves returning to the UK in 5 or 10 years? If the latter is the case, then there may be, you know, the use of certain things like bonds that help the return to the UK. So,
Mm.
as you say, it's a case by case basis, but generally, you know, people coming in here, they want to set up an investment portfolio. We do this a lot with clients. Maybe they sell their UK property, they've kind of had enough of being a UK landlord, they bring it across. And to be able to grow an investment portfolio without that drag of capital gains tax on it, it really just enhance the growth.
Very interesting. And then what about just in terms of banking? I mean, do people, obviously the financial services industry in Gibraltar is very well developed. High net worths can access local banking and set up accounts and things like that with relative ease, or what's the situation?
Yeah, I mean the regulatory kind of environment in Gibraltar is kind of mirrored on the UK, so it's very similar.
Mm,
So I think again, when people are moving to Gibraltar, as a transition is very easy. You know, you've got the same currency, same language, same kind of legal framework. When it comes to banking, and I'm talking your kind of everyday banking here, I'd say that there isn't that many banks left in Gibraltar. I think really
mm,
the main ones or the most common ones would be NatWest International and Gibraltar International. From my experience and the advice we tend to give clients is when you are coming across, I would say, at least initially, continue to use your UK bank account. I think
mm,
there's so much that you want to do or you need to do. That is one that you can save yourself that, at least initially, when you've got
mm.
your feet on the ground, then you can arrange an appointment. But I left the UK 7 years ago and I still use my Barclays account. So as an example,
Yeah.
you know, and it's this kind of same framework. So there are a few banks, it works the same as the UK, but I would say on your list of priorities, and it's going to be a big list, it can be down towards the bottom.
Okay, thanks for that. And Stuart, just thinking about the structuring options, tax efficient structuring for Gibraltar residents. Give us a sense there of the type of vehicles people might use to achieve different things with their wealth planning.
I think the three most sort of common structures are probably a company limited by shares is probably the most common vehicle. People coming from the UK who will have companies will be used to the structure, how it works, board of directors, shareholders. And then the second is trust. The Gibraltar trust legislation sort of follows the UK and common law, so it gives people a lot of comfort that sort of Gibraltar sort of standards and trust law is well established. With a trust, it really depends. I would say the most common trusts that we have in Gibraltar are Gibraltar discretionary trusts. We do have fiduciaries and licensed trustees that can provide professional trustee services. And more recently, what we have seen is an interest in Gibraltar foundations. Now, the reason for this is when the founders want to maintain an element of control, they're using sort of the foundation, which is more of a hybrid between sort of a company and a trust. So it really depends on the needs of the person. If they want to maintain control, it's a foundation. However, depending on, for example, their domicile in the UK or depending on their previous residence, that could dictate exactly the type of structure that works for them from a Gibraltar perspective.
And then for business owners or for active entrepreneurs, what's the advantage of for their next venture to set up in Gibraltar rather than the UK, or to move existing ventures, existing UK company vehicles into Gibraltar? What's the picture there?
I think if an individual relocates to Gibraltar and sets up a new venture, certainly a UK Gibraltar company, which is subject to 15% tax, would be lower than the UK tax. But what you would need to ensure is that, again, seek the appropriate advice in the UK, because if the individual, for example, directors are UK residents, then that company in Gibraltar could be deemed to be managed and controlled from the UK and still be taxable in the UK. In respect of UK businesses moving across, again, that certainly advisor would need to be sought in the UK, because you could have issues such as capital gains, transfer taxes, exit taxes. So again, the advice would need to be sought in the UK. But certainly a Gibraltar company for an individual relocating to Gibraltar is probably the most sort of a common thing that we see, having that vehicle in the jurisdiction in which they are now residing in.
Yeah. And Matt, just on the investment strategy side, so like a sterling, essentially a sterling investor makes the move to become resident in Gibraltar. Does anything change when they're inbound? Do they start seeing themselves more on euro costs, or or do they still maintain a kind of sterling mindset and reference to the portfolio? What's your
I think sterling still reigns.
Yeah.
Your cost and your spending here will be sterling. Of course, some people will have a kind of consideration if they're spending a lot of time in Spain, maybe they have a second property there. I think moving to Gibraltar is a great opportunity to just kind of review your overall asset base and investment structure. It's a change of taxation. I think people use it as an opportunity to look at their estate planning, bearing in mind UK inheritance tax. There's been a lot of changes to that in the UK. From a currency point of view, I think that's one of the easy transitions, stick with sterling.
And I guess many retirees are investing globally anyway through funds or listed companies with global exposures. Or do you find very sterling biased investors who invest? I mean, even if you're investing through the FTSE, you're buying global trends, aren't you? But is there any trends around how investors get exposure to global markets, or anything worth saying on that front?
Probably not particularly to Gibraltar.
Yeah.
I think in general, even those in the UK are looking at more kind of global focus now. There's no reason why someone should kind of just restrict themselves to the FTSE style investments. We see what's going on in the world. There's a lot going on in the world at the moment, and I think a kind of global outlook needs to be looked at, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's I think that investment strategies doesn't need to be changed just because of the relocation to Gibraltar. I think probably what needs to be changed is that you're probably moving to a different stage of your life. So maybe the asset base you've got has to be in keeping with that.
Very relevant. Yeah. And Stuart, just coming on the estate planning point, I mean, we noted lack of inheritance tax, but what does it mean for governance, particularly people are there in the later stages of their life? Do they need new wills? Do you have power of attorneys? What's the sort of governance around older clients and how they should set themselves up legally if they're in Gibraltar?
Certainly, the misconception sometimes that we have clients moving over, in particular from the UK, obviously pre sort of the changes to the non-dom was, now I'm in Gibraltar, I'm not subject to inheritance tax. Obviously not, then you say, oh, are you still domiciled in the UK? And your domicile could dictate that. That, of course, significant changes. And now there's different rules depending on the number of years you're out, 7 and 10. So if an individual has sought the advice from the UK and they are truly out of the inheritance tax sort of framework in the UK, having under the new rules, then certainly yes, from a Gibraltar perspective and subject to not having sort of any estates in other jurisdictions, then absolutely inheritance tax could be a fundamental thing when it comes to succession planning. And with that, wills and lasting power of attorneys. Gibraltar does introduce lasting power of attorney several years ago, which requires both for finances and for health to be registered with the Supreme Court in the case of individuals losing their mental capacity. And wills, again, you can establish a will in Gibraltar, register it with the Supreme Court, and there's different types of wills that could be established. So, for example, you could, depending on your circumstances, set up a testamentary will whereby a trust is established on death that administers the estate. So all of this forms part of our succession planning. I know it sounds cliche, but there's no one size fits all. It would really depend on the objectives of the individual and what that individual wants for the short, medium, and long term for future generations.
And Matt, do you see people using insurance products for mitigate inheritance tax liabilities, or whether if they're making gifts, if they've retained, you know, they've still got UK domicile and they're either making gifts or to use insurance to match liabilities that come down the line?
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we've obviously, the UK has moved from the domicile to the residency regime, which is a kind of flat 10 years. So I think from our point of view, the domicile system was a little bit unclear. People weren't sure if there's, at least we have clarity now. You've got those 10 years. So using a life insurance policy to cover that 10 years is a very good planning tool as well. Likewise, as you say, if they make gifts, they can use something to cover the 7 years of that gift period as well. So we're seeing more and more. And I think insurance is something that we haven't mentioned today that's very important as well. That you're moving to a new country, just because it's a British overseas territory doesn't mean you shouldn't review your insurance policies. Some of those may not be covering you in your new life in Gibraltar. So it's worth reviewing those. Maybe if you need more to cover inheritance tax exposure, something like that. So insurance, again, that plays a key part of that overall package.
Okay, there's a question in the Q&A just asking about, are there any practicalities that employers should be considering if attracting talent from the UK and that might require support, relocation support? So I think the question here is that from a Gibraltar firm perspective, bringing UK people over. I mean, Stuart, do you have experience in ISOLAS of bringing talent in from the UK and getting them settled in? What's your view on the practicalities of that?
Absolutely. We assist many firms with sort of global mobility and a lot of sort of gaming companies and other financial services companies relocating and bringing on a lot of staff. I think apart from the HEPSS status, of course, not all individuals will be high executives and in those amounts, but there are other benefits that you could use to attract talent coming from the UK. In particular, for example, there is allowances under the tax legislation specific to accommodation and to relocation. So, for example, they've announced some changes to the rules, but those rules haven't taken effect yet, which will reduce the period from 7 years to 4. But effectively, if an employer pays for an accommodation to an employee that relocates from the UK to Gibraltar to take up employment, then that individual would be subject to a tax-free amount in respect of the rental amount. So right now, that period, that tax-free window is for 7 years. So if the remuneration package is structured to take advantage of that accommodation allowance, I think that's a very, very significant, very attractive way to restructure sort of remuneration to take advantage of that exemption.
Matt, do you have a perspective on people moving in as an employee? I mean, moving country is always difficult. I would say that of all the variables, you've actually got a fairly straight through route if you've got a secure employment or ready to go, versus moving to many parts of the world. What's your take on an employee moving across to Gibraltar from the UK.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's the most straightforward route. I think pre the pause to residency as well, we could see through the applications that we submit that there's been a tightening of the rules for some time. I mean, some time ago, self-sustainability was a route to residency, which was effectively, regardless of your age and status, if you had certain amount of assets and you could demonstrate that you could look after yourself, then you could get in. And they closed that a few years ago. So they've been tightening up, but the route for employees is a relatively straightforward one. You know, you've got a job that qualifies you, you're going to be paying tax, you're going to be paying social insurance. So I think it is probably the easiest route. Maybe not for the individual who has to deal with a new country and a new job, but you know, we can't help them with that side, I'm afraid.
Good. We're just coming towards the end of this webinar. It's been hugely insightful. Stuart, do you have any closing thoughts? What's your kind of top tip? What's the key takeaway for someone who's watched this this piece of content?
I think my headline would be that residency is granted on paper, but it's tested in life. The easiest part of residency is the application process and getting through the initial hurdles. But the real test is that you create Gibraltar becomes the center of your life and that you spend your time in Gibraltar. It's very easy to come to Gibraltar and take up Cat 2 and take up residency. But if the reality is that you return to the UK and you exceed their days, and you go into Spain and you exceed their days, the Gibraltar proposition is no longer that attractive. So make Gibraltar your real home, and then certainly it can work from a residency and other benefits perspective.
And always seek proper advice is always the takeaway from these sessions. But Matt, what's your concluding thoughts? Anything that comes up there that you table with people who are mulling this over?
Well, for me, I think in general, I think Gibraltar is an incredible opportunity. I think it's going to be a really exciting year for Gibraltar as well, but incredible opportunity from a financial, tax planning, and lifestyle point of view. But it only works if you plan properly. And from our experience, those who plan and start early, they're the ones who benefit from it. So I think that's important. And I think one that always comes up is don't forget about UK IHT. Stuart mentioned it earlier and had so many times people, I'm in Gibraltar now, there's no inheritance tax. Great. And then you have to break the news to them. So don't forget, there are ways to plan against it, and it's a great opportunity.
Fantastic. Well, look, gentlemen, thank you for your time this afternoon. It's been very interesting to hear all about Gibraltar. I encourage those who are thinking about it to reach out to Stuart or to Matt for